All right, welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I'm here today. Busy week in wrestling. Got a huge weekend coming up, obviously, with Full Gear on Saturday. Also got some New Japan. But we're going to ignore all of that for this podcast because we are talking about one man, Jason, and that is Roman Reigns. We're going to do a deep dive on Roman Reigns' kind of entire career here today, but focus also a lot on what's the recent developments in his career over the past 2 months now, I think it is. Came back at SummerSlam, so it'll be in August. It doesn't seem that long ago, but lots happened over those 2 months span. But really, kind of just talking about the evolution of his career and this huge step he's taken turning heel. Real quick, Jason, just talking about him right now, what are your immediate thoughts on Roman Reigns on November 6th, 2020?
Yeah, I mean, right now, this is probably the best Roman Reigns we've ever seen in his career. And that's due to multiple reasons. Obviously, a heel turn, something fans are desperately wanting. But I think just also just confidence. It's like Roman has never been more confident than he's ever been. And that's always just due to experience. We always say that like, oh, if they have more experience, their promos will get better. And we've seen that. Like Roman has a ton of experience now. He's super confident with where he's at, especially
Yeah.
in
Confidence.
life as well. Even look at his personal life, obviously overcoming cancer once again, and it just seems like have a happy family life as well. And so he's pretty much at the top of his game right now. What do you think, Jesse, about Roman Reigns right now?
I think that this is I hesitate to say it's the most interesting he's ever been because I think the Shield was really interesting and big when it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Since he's left the Shield and that's dissolved, this is easily the most interesting he's ever been. And Roman Reigns to me is always interesting. Now, the reason he's interesting is often because there's been controversy surrounding his push as far as WWE shoving him down fans' throats
Yeah,
when they were rejecting him, pushing him instead of other people. So it's not always been like fascinating for like good reasons. But right now, I think he is the most interesting person easily in WWE, if not in all of professional wrestling, because the heel turn, fans have been waiting for it forever.
yeah,
And I mean, when he first started kind of getting that big push and people were kind of starting to reject him a little bit, everyone was like, oh, they should turn him heel. Because if you really boil it down, the most logical thing to do is you're pushing someone, the fans don't like them. Well, we should turn him heel because the fans already don't like him. It should be
yeah.
That's the obvious move. And I mean, the push of Roman Reigns has been so complicated because WWE for so long has refused to do that. So now that he's finally heel, it's very fascinating because now we're finally seeing something that's been rumored about since 2014, right?
Yeah, yeah. And even then, like, you also add in Paul Heyman to that aspect as well. And it's even more fascinating because obviously, throughout the Roman Reigns push, he's been pitted against Brock Lesnar. Of course, he's been face to face with Paul Heyman as well. And so even adding him on is just so it's interesting because, like I said before, Roman's promos have been much better than before. So it's sort of like a CM Punk type thing where like he doesn't really need Paul Heyman, but like just adding him on just adds more to the character and even more.
Well, I think the key thing with Heyman here is not necessarily Heyman's role on screen, but
Sure.
his role off screen. It's been
Yeah.
reported that Paul Heyman is really kind of working with Reigns and WWE on the creative process for this angle, similar to how Heyman put together the angles for Brock Lesnar.
And Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, and Ronda Rousey, even though he wasn't aligned on screen with Ronda Rousey, but it was
Yeah.
said that he kind of put it together. And I think that's a huge aspect of this. I think there was this idea that when Roman was a babyface, that if he turned heel, it would solve all the problems. But I never really thought that was true because it's not enough to just turn heel. The heel turn and the subsequent storyline following the heel turn has to be good.
Sure. Yeah.
It can't just be, oh, he's a bad guy now. That solves it. You need to have a real story set up. And I think that's where Heyman really comes in, is that he's a guy that's been able to piece together a story and set up a very interesting program with Roman Reigns and the Usos, which really came out of left field. I mean, who out here was saying, Roman should turn heel and he should feud with the Usos? That's really what's going to get him over. Like, that isn't what I don't think a lot of people thought. It wasn't on the radar screen
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Roman Reigns' heel turn, but I think it has been a great first opponent for him to feud with. It made a lot of sense for him as the longtime good guy to feud with his close family members who are still good guys and want to know why he's turned bad. Very logical story to tell there, and I think it's been really a really good storyline. I didn't really like their match. Tell me, what do you think about their match at Hell in a Cell? Because it's gone a lot. It's been very polarizing. What was your reaction to that?
I think initially I like the idea of an I Quit match. Obviously, with the whole drama they've been building
Mhm.
up, like it was really good. I thought the build was really good. I was very excited for the match. Obviously, the Hell in a Cell stipulation, I kind of agree with the. Seems like the consensus is that it didn't need Hell in a Cell. I think, I think what you're hinting at is the end, right? Where sort of the way like Jimmy was involved in all that, Roman crying, very overdramatic nature of it. Um, I think on paper, if you wrote it down, I think everything made sense in that sort of way. I think the execution just wasn't what they were expecting. Like if you wrote that down on paper, I can see everything making sense and why that would be a perfect moment for that storyline. But I just think execution wise, it just was a bit it didn't really gel well when we saw it visually.
Yeah, the key takeaway for me for the match was that I really liked the storyline.
Hmm.
I really liked the build. I still like the storyline. I still like the characters involved. But in a vacuum, that match just wasn't for me. I didn't like the pacing of it at all. I didn't like the dramatic monologues in between
Sure.
movements. It made the match feel very long without a lot of action, and it also just felt kind of like, for me personally, like disrespectful to wrestling fans as far as WWE really having to hold their hand and tell them
Hmm.
this is the story that's happening. Like Roman Reigns can't pick up the steel stairs and just smash Jey Uso with
Yep.
it, because as a wrestling fan, if you see that, you're like, oh man, I can't believe he did that. That was so violent. He must really like what's going on with Roman. He's like
Hmm.
unhinged. You can't just do that. Roman has to pick up the stairs and hold them over his head for a solid minute while he's like, don't make me do it, Jay. I'll do it. You gotta recognize me. Like he's just like, it's so much talking into the camera, and it feels like I'm watching a community theater performance. And to their credit, the guys, Roman and the Usos and everyone involved, like played their role well, but to
Hmm.
me that's not like proper pro wrestling storytelling. I heard someone say last week that it kind of feels like cheating, like because you're allowed to talk and explain all of your moves, that like you can't
Right.
say that is like. And the weird thing is that I thought Bayley and Sasha Banks had a similar intense match, but had it like more traditionally, where they didn't do all the talking and all that
Hmm.
stuff like that, and somehow everyone was still able to understand the story that they were telling without all of that. So I was a little turned off by that aspect of it, and I do hope that the long monologue portions of matches are kind of not going to keep happening in the future with Roman Reigns. I hope that's not the new Roman Reigns match. Is
Hmm.
Roman talks for most of it. We'll see.
but but I think I don't know, just maybe again like maybe like with the way they wrote it down, maybe just like the fact there wasn't like there's no crowd there, and so I guess maybe they just wanted to compensate
Yeah,
for
I mean,
just the lacking aspects of it. But again, I think just what everyone was saying about this pandemic era, if you want to call it that, maybe they're just experimenting with a new thing
yeah.
because it's not like we saw this in other matches before, with like a Drew McIntyre. He
Well,
wasn't, or Randy Orton.
I feel like we did see it at their match at Night of Champions or Clash of Champions. I feel like there was a similar kind of like a lot of talking, and it was very
Sure, yeah.
dramatic. Um, so that's why I'm a little more hesitant that this might be a trend for big Roman Reigns matches as
Mhm.
opposed to just a one-time experiment. But at the same time, while I didn't particularly like it. There were a lot of people on there that were like, "This was amazing! I can't believe it!" Uh, like they really enjoyed the storytelling aspects of it. So I think it's like I said, it was polarizing. It's like I didn't really work for me, but I understand that it did work for some people. And hey, maybe this is the path to the future. That this is how they're going to have to tell stories in wrestling. I hope that's not the way they do it, because I feel like I can understand a story without being beat over the head with it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
um, so like we'll get back to Roman right now, but I also kind of wanted to step into a time machine and bring us back. Um, when Roman debuted on the main roster, which was in 2012, in the Shield debuted, and that was kind of the start. And I was kind of going back and looking at what people thought about that, because if we get back at the time machine and go back to 2012, Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins were known people before. I mean, this is a totally different era with FCW, instead of NXT. Like, the general public and even most wrestling fans were not really aware of like what was happening in Florida Championship Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't like people were closely reporting on the storylines or anything like that. But when the Shield came up, I think Dean Ambrose had already been. Do you remember when Dean Ambrose was teasing a storyline with like Mick Foley?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was even John Moxley himself. He talked about it multiple times on podcasts. How like he was trying to do something, but again, just never came to fruition. But yeah, I do remember him trying to do something with Mick Foley.
Yeah,
At
it
least.
was pre-Shield, and like it was actually really interesting. It would have been interesting to see where it went, because it was like
Yeah.
Mick Foley was like signing autographs at like a convention, and like he just pops up and he like says like, Mick, it's your fault. All these men are injured trying to follow your style. You've caused so much destruction you don't even know about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was like really interesting. Never seen anything like it. But I think the thing was that Mick Foley like physically couldn't have done the match, so they kind of dropped it. I think that's correct. And so like, but that was when I first like, oh, who's this Dean Ambrose guy? I wasn't really watching like that much indie wrestling at the time, so I wasn't aware of like John Moxley and in Dragon Gate USA or in IWA Mid South or any of those promotions.
Mm-hmm.
But so I wasn't really aware of him. That was when I first became aware of him. But and then Seth Rollins, I think people knew about as being a really talented wrestler in FCW, very successful wrestler on the Independents, and former Ring of Honor champion. He was not a mystery when he came up to most people. But Roman Reigns was the third guy who people really didn't know. I remember people saying like, "Oh yeah, it's Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins, or John Moxley and Tyler Black, if you knew them from the indie days."
Yeah.
And then there's this other guy who isn't from the indies, who is going to be like the muscle in the group.
He was a former football player.
Yeah, but he was a WWE guy. Obviously,
Yeah.
he was part of a long wrestling family, ex-college football player that then got into pro wrestling. There's plenty of people like that. But I remember people like, oh yeah, there's it's Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins, and then it's this guy Roman Reigns, and like for a long time, like he didn't really do anything that like was really impressive. Like Moxley did all the talking,
Yeah.
in most of the promos. Roman might say a word here or there, but Ambrose was the promo guy. And then Rollins did a lot of the wrestling with Ambrose, and then like Reigns would come in, he'd get the hot tag, he'd hit a few moves, basically not do any selling. Obviously, clearly was being protected and groomed for this role, but he really wasn't. When the Shield first debuted, he wasn't the breakout star. It only became after a few years where it became obvious that WWE thought that this guy was supposed to be like the next big face, and they're going to do everything they can to protect him.
Yeah.
That we really started to like, okay, this guy isn't just gonna, he's not just a guy that got brought up to the roster. I'm trying to think of like guys from that time period who got brought up and then like never did anything. Like I don't want to say like I'm blanking on like my 2011,
I
2002.
mean, well, like wasn't Adam Rose a big thing at the time too? At that
Yeah,
time.
I'm trying. Oh man, they all blend into. They all almost honestly like the history just blends into one. That's the call-ups. I think Rose is a few years later. I'm thinking like maybe like a like when they brought in like Zack Ryder or Trent Beretta, and they
Oh
like pushed them
yeah.
for a little while and they don't do
Hmm.
anything with them. Like it was clear that Reigns was not going to be a guy like that. He was going to be a super pushed guy, and that's where I think people started to evaluate him. And so I guess from I'll ask you like from those early days, like what did you think about Roman Reigns? Did you look at him and say this guy's got everything? He's going to be a big superstar. Like how did you feel about like Shield era Roman Reigns as far as like being like a future like main event guy?
Yeah, I always thought he was sort of the odd man out, especially since I think it's kind of been debunked. I don't know if it is, but CM Punk, he's always talked about how, Roman was never seen as that third Shield guy. It was supposed to be, Chris Hero or
Yeah.
Cash Ono, whatever you want to call him. And so it always seemed like, okay, they just kind of threw him in there just because. And obviously, like you said, Moxley and Seth Rollins, they were the big indie guys, especially Seth Rollins. It was clear that they saw something big in them, especially since Moxley was the singles guy. He was the one with the U.S. title, and Roman and Seth were the tag guys.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, we just do this as wrestling fans. We always see guys as the Shawn Michaels or the Marty Jannetty. It always seemed like Seth Rollins was going to be the guy, and Roman would kind of get lost in the shuffle. And that's what I honestly thought about Roman Reigns. Like you said, he didn't really do a whole bunch. He was the muscle guy, but that's all we could really see out of him. He didn't really talk that much. He said like a one-liner here and there to end a promo, but still, that isn't really indicative of future success. And he was always there for the triple power bomb spot, and it was always impressive.
Yeah.
But that seemed to be a ceiling. He was always the mid carder. I didn't really see a main event status for him. I don't know. Did you think the same way, or did you see anything more from him during that time, at least?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing for me was that, one of the things I want to get into is when going back, talking about the Shield era, Roman Reigns. That was, and you mentioned like the story according to CM Punk. Again, I don't know how true it is. There's been conflicting reports. Is that Punk pitched the idea of the Shield with three known indie guys, which would be Hero, John Moxley, and Tyler Black, and Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, um, and then the company was like, well, we like two of those guys, not super high on Hero. We're going to put one of our guys, which would be a non-indie guy, a WWE find, in that role. And Punk was like, sure, whatever. It's not my hill to die on. But very fortuitous for Reigns to land in that group where, like you said, he just got the hot tag. He get the power bomb spot. Didn't really have to do a lot, but put him with a hot act where he could shine, where his weaknesses could be hidden. He could get more ring time. He could improve on everything, but be put in a real group that had real momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know where his career would be like if he just came up as a singles guy. In this company, how bad their track record when it comes to pushing new baby faces that they call up from developmental. He would have been put if he was pushed as a singles guy and he'd be thrown into the spotlight and he wasn't ready. He wasn't experienced enough. He might flounder and WWE would give up on him, and we'd have the last 6 or 7 years of pro wrestling would be completely different. I mean, like if he came up and he's Keith Lee, he's Matt Riddle, he's these guys they push, and he would have had a lot less experience at that point than those guys are now. But we've seen it countless times where WWE's high on somebody, and then like they maybe push them too soon, they kind of fail, and then they're dismissed and never heard from again. So I think that's something that, like, obviously I think it's not secret that it was a good thing for Reigns to be in the Shield, but I do think, like, I wonder, like, is there any way he gets over if he's brought up at the same time and he's only got like a year or two of wrestling experience in FCW, and he's not really a promo guy, and he's not really like selling a lot, and he's just like kind of like, I just don't. I think that's an interesting alternative scenario for him. Now, when it became clear that he was going to be the guy, for me, like with my thing with Roman, and it really hasn't changed over the years, is that my stance on him is that I just never thought he was talented enough for the role of like biggest face in WWE. And that isn't to say that he's not talented or I think that he's a hack, but I always wondered that, like, if you're going to be the face of WWE, you better be the best person in the industry at your job. It doesn't mean you have to be the best wrestler. It helps to be a very good wrestler. And Reigns, to his credit, as far as like WWE is concerned, is a very good in-ring performer. I rarely go into a Roman Reigns match thinking it's going to suck. But when you're talking about the top of the industry, you have to be like a transcendent talent in some way, shape, or form. Even like I know like with John Cena, I don't care what anyone says about John Cena. John Cena's charisma, John Cena's ability to talk in front of 14,000 people, to take a crowd that's booing him and turn it around and get them to pay attention to what he's doing, his ability to make other wrestlers look important merely by being in the ring with him and feuding with him.
Yeah.
He's a transcendent talent. I know he's never been the best in-ring worker or in-ring technician, but there's no denying that when you watch John Cena, you can't say that guy is special. That guy has so much talent. And you can say it about Steve Austin, you can say it about Hulk Hogan, you can say it about, even when Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, even though those guys didn't draw the same way as like Austin or Hogan, like you still be like, okay, those guys are super, super talented. For me with Reigns, it was just like, I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's the most talented person in the company. I don't think he has the charisma to be, and it has never displayed the charisma to me to justify like we're going to build the entire company and this around him and this guy's going to drive business for us. I just never got that kind of I never got that kind of feeling from him. And I think with the heel turn, he's closer. He's definitely put in a better role to showcase his skills. But I don't see him, and I don't see The Rock. I don't see John Cena. I don't see Steve Austin. I don't see these guys who like carried the company for years and years. Just when it comes to pure talent, and in anything, you need talent more than ever because their booking is so bad.
Yep.
I don't know. What do you think about him as just like as far as being the guy, like as being someone who you think can live up to that role?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's kind of interesting as well during this time in WWE, especially when he was starting to become the guy. This is an older Vince McMahon who, as he gets older, is growing more and more out of touch. You look back on those times with, Stone Cold, The Rock, even John Cena, Ruthless Aggression era. He was at least, you could see some things fading a little bit during the John Cena era, but still, John Cena has grown as the longer he's been in the industry and the longer he's grown friendlier for Vince McMahon. I don't know if they're true friends or not, but they've grown friendlier. He's allowed a lot more leeway to do what he wants. Roman Reigns, he's relatives with The Rock, but that doesn't mean he gets sway over what he gets to say. And obviously, team has not helped him at all when writing his promos. Granted, he was shaky in the mic, but still, he wasn't really given a lot of good material to work with,
Yeah.
and he wasn't really given an opportunity to succeed in promos. And even the storylines as well. There wasn't any struggle with him. There's no reason to relate with Roman Reigns. Obviously, it wasn't until a very real thing happened. His cancer came back into remission. That was when people started relating to Roman Reigns a bit more. There's a little bit more struggle. You've actually found sympathy for him. During the whole entire run, there was no sympathy towards Roman Reigns. You didn't really care what he did. And there was no reason to care because this guy's the best. He's gonna do this, and that. And that was a big struggle with him. And again, like I said, with this time in WWE during his run, it's all been about trying to keep the stockholders happy. That's the biggest thing. And granted, there's different things here and there of how they've been doing that, but still, they went with a safe choice. And always with WWE during this time, everyone has been complaining that they don't take chances, and I don't think Roman Reigns has been given a chance to actually break out on his own and try to experiment and fail. There's always he's failed, but he's never been given a chance to work his way back up until this time right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scenario where Reigns is booked better. It's not like he's there. I think that Roman Reigns has been booked better comparatively than like almost anyone else
Oh
on the
yeah,
roster. If you
definitely,
compare as
definitely.
like who's been protected, who's been allowed to get key wins, who's been
Hmm.
pushed to the moon, like. But that's not to say that it hasn't been perfect. One of the key things, about his heel turn, is that Roman Reigns' character from 2012 until August 2020, basically didn't change at all.
Yeah.
He was the same person. He wore the same outfit. He had the same music. He played the same role. He used the same catchphrases. He seemed to be in this stasis where he stayed the same. And in hindsight, it's pretty incredible to think that they tried all of these things to get him over, but they never changed him. They tried to, make it him versus the McMahons, and the McMahons are keeping him down, and Roman Reigns is, that storyline that they've been trying to do for 30 years. Then they tried to have the Undertaker put him over. Undertaker's gonna put over Roman Reigns, and John Cena's gonna put over Roman Reigns, and all this stuff like that. And they had, oh, he's fighting with Brock Lesnar, and Brock Lesnar, doesn't care about WWE, and he's not showing up for the title, and Brock doesn't care about the company, and Roman's going to save it for the company. But so the stuff around him changed, but his character didn't change at all. And his character wasn't catching on the way I think WWE wanted him to. And it wasn't until very recently where it's like he comes out and he's, got a different look, different attitude, and it's like, whoa. It's only when that happened did I realize, I'm like, yeah, this guy didn't change for 8 years. Like, it'd be like, it's like, to compare him to The Rock debuts in 1996, and, 8 years later, it's 2004. I mean, that's basically the entire career of The Rock.
Yeah.
But, like, he's so different. Undertaker 1990 to 1998. Even John Cena from, if you wanted to go from 2002 when he first debuted to 2010. It's very different characters. There's a lot of evolution that goes into that. And this is a guy who basically just stayed the same and, was week after week, show after show, pay-per-view after pay-per-view, and he didn't evolve. And his character wasn't working. And finally, at last, he's changed. And that in its of itself has made it very interesting, because we're now suddenly we got so used to being fed the same thing that now that it's different, it's way more interesting. Be it good or bad, it's thankfully been very good, but I think any change would have been at least interesting from a fan's perspective.
Yeah, I think even you could have kept his character the same, but if he changed his attire, if he just wore, if he wore like a t-shirt all the
He wore the
time,
vest.
yeah, he just kept wearing the
Shield
vest the whole time.
And to me, that always felt like desperately clutching on to the last time Roman Reigns was liked by the fans.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, is that like the Shield was what got him over, so he needs to have the Shield stuff, and we'll do a Shield reunion every few years to make sure everyone remembers that he was in the Shield. And remember when everyone liked Roman, instead of just, look at how much Rollins has changed since the Shield ended. Look at how much Ambrose has changed. Moxley has changed. You shouldn't stay that way the entire time. I mean, a huge criticism of the Cena era was that Cena stayed the same, and I think there was evolution from when he debuted to probably when he reached his peak, or in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, there was like, oh, he's so stale, and Roman was like that. Even if I think people didn't necessarily. I didn't really realize that until he changed, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is so interesting because, he's different. Like, even when he just showed up at SummerSlam, and he just shows up at the end, he basically doesn't. He like just spears Bray Wyatt, and calls him a freak in a mask, and grabs the title. But it was clear, it's like, this is a different Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
And
well, even then, like Roman Reigns never changed, and WWE didn't change either. Like you said, his character, it didn't gel with the audience. That's because audiences now like it's the era of the anti-hero. People like the cool heel per se, and Roman Reigns, he was always just the pure baby face, and people don't like pure baby faces anymore.
Yeah, when it came to the booking of Roman Reigns, as far as a babyface goes, and just as far as the whole philosophy surrounding him from WWE, I always thought that it was outdated. I thought that WWE saw a big, good-looking guy, good athlete, something that historically had been something that you would really that has babyface potential, and pushed him like a babyface, using what I would feel like would be an outdated model for what the big babyface should be. Now, granted, of course, John Cena was a big, good-looking guy, former college football player who succeeded in that field, but I just think, like, when they were pushing Reigns, they're pushing him under the guise that in NX and FCW, or when he first came up, Vince is like, that's going to be the guy. That's the guy we're going to push. And even as years and years of evidence showed that he probably wasn't going, and at least in that incarnation, was not going to be the guy that they wanted him to be, and not be the business driver that they wanted him to be. They didn't change, and they just stuck on the same thing. Oh, but he's going to be the guy because, it's always been money that a guy, a big babyface, athletic, handsome guy is always going to be money. And just being what gets over in wrestling in this era is different than what got over than in previous eras. You have to adapt. You talked about the cool heel, the anti-hero. To me, wrestling fans just want to see people who take action and people who are interesting. Yeah, and a huge problem in WWE is that the baby faces are often presented as being very passive and stupid and standing there and waiting for the heel to do something. So when, I think the big one was when Becky Lynch hit Ronda Rousey with all those cane shots, and that was supposed to turn Becky Lynch heel, and it turned her babyface, and that caught everyone by surprise, or at least caught WWE by surprise. But I think it was obvious that the fans are going to react to someone taking action and someone doing something that they weren't expecting, and that's what they want to see. They want that excitement. They don't want to see the babyface predictively beat the heel. They don't want to see the babyface just the heel comes in and tries to cheat and do all that stuff like that. The fans are more sophisticated. They're not just going to choose their allegiance based solely on the morality presented by the characters. They need to have a real connection with them. I mean, it's ridiculous because Steve Austin was a guy who did tons of heel things, but because he was so charismatic and was always taking action, and he was always the aggressor, that's what made him such a good babyface, was because the fans could always count on him to kick ass and not just stand there and get beat down by 30 heels or get screwed out of the title or, whatever they try to do to get heel heat. And that's the era of the white meat babyface is pretty much gone, with the exception of there are a few exceptions here and there individually. But I agree that in the sense that, people that character's not going to resonate with people the same way. Real quick, this is something interesting. I heard Dave Meltzer say this about a month or two ago following the Reigns heel turn, and this is not a report as much of it is as an observation, but he said that if you noticed, the people in the company who have the performers in the company who have a lot of power or political clout or backstage, a good relationship with Vince, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Those people tend to be heels. Seth Rollins turned heel. Randy Orton, always a heel, pretty much. Always, when he's babyface, he talks openly about how he prefers to be a heel.
Mm-hmm.
Triple H obviously loved being a heel. Chris Jericho, when he's there, wanted to be a heel. And now Roman is a heel. And I think, even if you want to say, I'll throw Daniel Bryan as someone who turned heel when he was an obvious babyface person, but when he came back, and obviously he has, some booking clout, he wanted to turn heel. And I think that the interesting observation from that is that I think that the people who know WWE, who have been around for a while, think, well, this company's not good at being booking babyfaces. So you have to be a heel if you want to be interesting. And so I think Roman, now that he's matured and he's at this point in his career where he was gone for months, he decided to come back. We're still not super clear, what the situation was there. But it's his personal decision.
Mm-hmm.
But he came back, and he came back as a heel. And I don't think that, I'm sure, and they said he's wanted to turn heel for a while. And, that was an unsurprising report when we found out that, because I think there is this attitude that it's better to be a heel in WWE because they don't book babyfaces well. And if you want to be presented as cool, if you want to be presented as someone who takes action, if you want to be presented as someone that the fans like, you're better off being a heel than you are as a babyface.
Yeah, I think also at least specifically for Roman, before Roman returned, I think people were wanting him to come back because there's a lot of talk of, oh, WWE's lacking the star power. They need someone to come back, either a Roman or a Ronda Rousey, perhaps. Because obviously this is around when Becky Lynch, she had to leave.
Yeah.
Charlotte, she was kind of on her way out during that time, and so there's a lack of star power with WWE there. And so I think Roman, he has the proper leverage now. Because obviously, if Roman Reigns leaves SmackDown, that's gonna kill SmackDown's ratings, and that's bad for Vince McMahon. And so I think specifically for him, he understands that he has a ton of leverage right now. Obviously there's a limit to that for certain things, but I think obviously he understands that, like, hey, you need me. If I leave, if you put the championship on another guy for an extended period of time, like, your company is done. SmackDown's done. Like, SmackDown has a ton of great guys, but the show's obviously built around Roman Reigns.
Now it is, especially with the draft. They cleared out the Fiend. They cleared out. I mean, the rumor now is that he's going to be feuding with Daniel Bryan, which is great because if you look at the SmackDown roster, like, now that Roman's a heel, like, outside of Daniel Bryan, like, what baby faces can Roman feud with that have like any form of credibility that people believe could beat him besides Bryan? Like, they got two pay-per-views out of the Uso storyline, which kind of came out of nowhere. And that's a huge feather in the cap of Paul Heyman for and everyone involved for putting that together.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, he's gonna have to feud with Bryan for a while, which should be a really interesting feud because both guys are super talented, and now Bryan's a great babyface and Reigns has become a great heel. So that I'm looking forward to that. But you look at that side, you look at that SmackDown side with the with post draft. The amount of they need to make a baby face. They need to make a big baby face that they're not going to be able to snap their fingers and get it done because you're going to need to create some credibility. I know, like, Big E is going for a push. I think that Big E needs to get some big pay-per-view wins and get some real. I know we all like Big E, but I think he needs to get some real momentum going if he's going to be stepping if he's going to be stepping in the ring with Roman Reigns. And I'm expected to think that Big E has a chance at winning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, NXT call-ups, perhaps, but even then, like WWE is not really good at elevating two guys at the same time. It's usually just one guy goes over, and the other guy, he's just kind of lost on the wayside. So I don't think an NXT face call-up would actually benefit anybody.
Yeah, and like, who they calling up from NXT that like you really think could beat Roman Reigns, like, as soon as they bring him up? Like, right now in NXT with Karrion Kross gone out currently, I don't see the person in NXT that, like, I feel like Vince is super, super high on and will want to push. Like, I think, guys like Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano, Finn Balor, obviously he's already been on the main roster before. Those guys are talented and are good in their roles and could succeed perhaps if pushed at a superstar level on the main roster. But I don't see, like, the person that Vince McMahon is, like, really, really high on. You could have told me that Keith Lee or Matt Riddle might have fit that bill. Obviously, that doesn't appear to be the case. Matt Riddle, of course, now is just Riddle. No Matt. He lost his first name. A true sign of a mid-card talent. You lose your first name.
Well,
or your
plus
last
he's got the legal trouble he's in. So I don't think that's not gonna get.
We're not doing a deep dive Matt Riddle, but I'm just saying, is like, I don't see the person right now. I don't see the person in NXT that's gonna solve it. And like I said, it's time to, like, you gotta make somebody, man. Like, you gotta, like, give me 6 months of consistent booking of person picking up wins, building momentum. Maybe they change their character a little bit. They get a new catchphrase. Get them going, because it just seems like WWE just either is going back to they go back to the past with people like Randy Orton. They or they try somebody and they push them way too early and way too out of the blue. Like, all suddenly they're supposed to be a number one contender and they haven't gotten a win on pay-per-view in forever. It's just like I like to see, like, I guess Drew McIntyre would be the last person I feel like they really did it at least somewhat successfully with like bringing him along, protecting him, building a momentum. So when he was there, people bought him as a legitimate guy. And it just seems like WWE often is either looking too short term to develop that kind of long term plan consistently. But I think that's what's going to end up happening, especially if you just look at SmackDown and you just look at the guys. And that's why I look at someone like Big E and say, right now, would I expect Big E to beat Roman Reigns in a match? Would I buy that as like a real huge match? No. But if they gave Big E a few months to not have 50-50 booking, and kind of push him at a new level and let him kind of organically work his way up, then one day, maybe at WrestleMania, Roman Reigns versus Big E is a legitimate match, then it feels like Big E can win. But that's going to take long-term booking, and it's going to take a lot of discipline to get there.
Well, let me ask you this. Like you said, WWE likes to go with short-term booking and go to the past. I mean, just reported today that Undertaker, he's coming back at Survivor Series. Do you think they're gonna go back to that well of Undertaker Roman Reigns once more, or do you think that's just a separate thing?
That's a really good question. I thought Goldberg and Reigns is a match that's definitely going to happen at some point. Obviously, that was supposed to be the WrestleMania,
right?
That was supposed to be the WrestleMania match. Yeah, could be the man. Goldberg could win the Royal Rumble and wrestle Roman Reigns at WrestleMania.
Oh,
I know, but that totally seems like something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the Undertaker is retired in his because if you take the documentary at face value, which I do, Undertaker says, yeah, if Vince McMahon called me and said, I need you for one more match, I'd do it. And it's like, well, he's going to do that. That every year at WrestleMania, the story is that Vince feels like it's not big enough and he needs to have a key match, and he calls up the Undertaker, and the Undertaker comes back. Or they need to have a special attraction match in Saudi Arabia, and that usually means Undertaker or Goldberg or Triple H coming out of semi-retirement to wrestle. So I totally think Undertaker's going to come back and wrestle at some point. I do think that with having pushed the last ride so heavily and really saying like, guys, the Undertaker's retired, and WWE really marketing that a ton, and even the Survivor Series thing is a marketing push for the Undertaker's retirement. It's like the farewell to the dead man. 30 years after he debuted, they're gonna have this thing with him. I do think that if Undertaker does wrestle again, obviously it will come across as a big match, but I do think that there'll be a little bit more fan resentment that
oh yeah, for sure,
we already said goodbye, please please don't come back. It's kind of like, I mean, a lot of wrestling retirements are like that, where someone retires a bunch of times, and there's a big ceremony and everything like that, and then they come back and everyone's like, but it is kind of like it reminds me of when Brett Favre was fun retirements every off season, and then he always came back. Kind of remembers that, and that was very exhausting. It kind of feels like that with the Undertaker, and it's like, and last few years I've been like, I'd be okay if I never saw an Undertaker match again.
Yeah, same here.
In Undertaker versus Roman, we saw it a few years ago. It wasn't very good. No. So
no.
And people will say you can do a cinematic match. Screw that. Stop with the I have a whole cinematic rant that I'll probably save for another show. But no, how about Roman wrestle somebody new? How about that? How about that you build a new star to rival Roman Reigns, so he has a real rival, and he's not just relying on old names of the past because they've never been able to build anyone else up. And kind of switching gears, but speaking of building other people up, one of the things that people ask me when I've given my Roman take over the years, which is well, I just don't think he's that talented. Someone else should get that role. People always ask me, well, who should they have done? Who should get pushed in that role? And one of the key aspects of responding to that question is that if you look at WWE over the past 6 or 7 years, the goal for the company has always been to get Roman Reigns over. And any long-time booking around the main event scene has been dictated with the idea of getting Roman Reigns over, to the degree that it has shaped the perceptions that people have about specific talents, because they have been sacrificed at one point or another in favor of Roman Reigns. I'll give an example of Braun Strowman, who I think Reigns is more talented than Braun Strowman. Strowman would not be my answer to that question. But to give an example of a guy who was getting more over than people expected, was being protected, was getting a pretty big push. But eventually they were like, okay, Braun, you got to lose to Brock Lesnar. And the reason Braun has to lose to Brock Lesnar is because it has to be a really big deal when Roman beats Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. So we're going to say you're going to lose to make Brock look super strong. So Reigns looks even stronger when he beats Lesnar and gets that big win. And that's just there's plenty of times where someone's push has been altered or stopped or sabotaged because the goal is Roman, not anybody else. So when I can't just tell you, well, they should have they should have pushed Daniel Bryan instead. They should have pushed Finn Balor instead. They should have pushed Samoa Joe instead. They should have pushed Kevin Owens. Any of these people. I'm not saying that's my answer to the questions, although I think that that some of those names might have fared better if given the same push that Roman got. But you understand what I'm saying is that like the Roman push has dominated WWE's star elevating structure over the years, that it's really hard to point to somebody and say, well, they would have been able to get more over because their careers have been inherently altered by the singular focus on Roman as the face of the company.
Yeah, that just kind of goes back to Vince stuck in his ways.
Yep.
He's very persistent that this is gonna work. This is gonna work. This time, and that's just how it is. Obviously, guys are trying. I think everyone's very supportive of Roman. He's a locker room leader.
Yeah, no one likes. I don't say this as like a knock on Roman. Like I have a lot of like, and I think he's really talented. Like it's not like, but if he's gonna be the face of the company, he's got to be like the best. And I just don't think that. It's like saying like, I think that CJ McCollum is the best player in the NBA, right? The rebuttal wouldn't be that like CJ McCollum isn't. Oh, he's terrible. Like, why would you say that? It would be like, well, he's good, but he's obviously not the best player in the NBA. Like it's like I'm not knocking him for not being talented because I think he's very talented, but I just don't see him at that transcendent level.
But yeah, it just goes like I think like some type of a committee approach. They probably could have done. Like you said, you just named off a bunch of names right there, like Kevin Owens, Daniel Bryan. Obviously, they want one singular guy as the face of the company, but still, I think the way things are going now, especially just in pop culture, it's all about groups and having multiple individuals, working together for this one thing. And so I think, they could have done that.
Jason, you're bordering close on your K-pop talk. I know you want to jump into it.
I was mostly talking about, the Avengers. Everyone's.
Oh yeah, okay, that's
Marvel. well, it just, again with Roman, Vince is stuck in his ways. I think everyone else go like, we hear. Triple H, you see with NXT, there have been faces of NXT once in a while, but still, it's been a rotating face, quote unquote, face of NXT, and I think that's something they could have done along the way. But obviously, yeah, like you said, like they lost that approach a long time ago, and it's really hard to come back from that.
Yeah, I mean, once people are booked at a certain way, that's another thing is that WWE is like once people are booked in a certain way, it's often hard for them to get back up the ladder, I guess. I think like when Kevin Owens first came in, he was, booked as a main event guy, feuded with John Cena, beat John Cena in a singles match, like did all this stuff, like, got the push as the Universal Champion, did all this stuff, lost to Goldberg. He's pretty much been a mid-carder ever since. And now if you were to push him back into the main event, I think he'd still deliver, but it would be much more difficult to get him over as legitimate because you've kind of pocketed him in as this specific person. I think that some person like Drew McIntyre has been able to overcome that because, obviously he was buried deep down in the card after getting kind of a big push.
Hmm.
But, he left the company. He was gone for years and years. He came back. He got pushed totally differently this time. Like, that's what you would have to do to kind of reclaim that role. And I agree that, like, a guy like Balor, like, you know, Balor, do you remember when Balor wrestled Brock Lesnar? Forget the show.
The was it Royal, no, Survivor Series?
It
Was
might
that
have been
Survivor
Survivor
Series?
Series. I think it was a bigger show. I don't know off the top of my head, but I just remember that match and like, like Balor, gets some offense in, hits a double stomp, and then Brock just locks him in the Kimura lock and he taps out. And like they hyped it up so big, like Brock got scared. He had to do that out of desperation, and people like talked themselves into this thing being great for Balor.
Hmm.
And I'm not taking a victory lap on this because I'm mad that it happened, but like when I saw that, I was like, that was just like Brock just being like, I gotta beat this guy right now, whatever, and like beating him in 5 seconds essentially. And I think that took a lot of the momentum away from Balor. And he's never been the same since. It wasn't something that helped his career at all.
Hmm.
He's battled injuries and stuff like that too, but he was a guy who was wrestling Brock Lesnar, and people were kind of like, this guy, maybe this guy, and now he's just like, he's just a guy in NXT now, and he's pushing NXT obviously, but I think that I would look at where he was, before that match with Brock Lesnar and where he is afterwards, and say that's a failure. Um,
But I think
and
going back to Roman Reigns, like you said,
yeah,
W they pigeonhole you, and I think what would have been beneficial for Roman Reigns is to go back to the mid card, build himself up there. But obviously, Roman Reigns is always a main event guy. You can't just put him back down because if you put him back down, that's seen as a step back. Even though he needed that step back when the push wasn't working, he needed a step
mhm.
back. He needed to rethink things, build himself back up in the mid card. I know he was U.S. champion, but that's just more of circumstance. Yeah, like Brock wasn't
Yeah,
around, and so U.S. champ was the main title. Like I mean like a legitimate, like build yourself up from the mid
yeah.
card, build yourself back up. But obviously you can't do that because that's just gonna kill your career.
No, yeah, I know, but and I think years ago I wrote about it somewhere. I'll have to find it online, but I think I advocated for just what you're talking about. I think I said something like, "What if Roman just held the Intercontinental Championship for 500 days, and it became like a really big deal that he was the Intercontinental Champion, and someone else can be the World Champion, and they can have main event feuds, but Roman, keeps grinding and earning respect on the mid card and
Hmm.
having these good matches, having a few good really feuds mixed in there, but keeps holding on the champion. The record for the Intercontinental Championship um, is like Honky Tonk Man at like something like 400, a little like 400 like 70 days or something like that. It might
Yeah.
it's in the
Sound
400. It's something that you could do. Like you could break that
yeah.
record, make a big deal about breaking that record. And I said like make that his title, define him as title, and then if he spends 2 years doing that, I think people would have a totally different appreciation for him if you were to try to push him again. Um, and getting back to Roman now, I think that turning him heel, the goal. I think the goal. Do you think the goal is to make him a babyface again?
Eventually,
The
yes.
long term goal, like one of the reasons he turned heel was because it's a path for him to become the babyface star that they've always wanted him to be.
Yeah, sort of like like the Rock.
Yeah,
He
no,
was
exactly.
he turned heel and then he became a big fake baby face.
Yeah, it's a pattern. It's a pattern model familiar with most wrestling fans. It's like you
Yeah.
start off as a heel so you can turn them babyface, and with any great heel, you hear it one day they're going to be a great babyface. So I think the goal is to still make him a babyface, but I'm still very curious about they turn him babyface again and they push him as the face of the company again. I think that people might just forget about this heel run. They might forget about how good he's been these last few months, and it'll be the exact same thing because they spent almost 8 years pushing this guy as the babyface, and the crowd rejected it over and over and over again. And I don't think that kind of resentment is just going to go away. He's different now. He's more interesting now, so people don't have that resentment, and he's not being pushed as the hero that we're all supposed to support, which is great. But I do think that there's some like long-term scar tissue that's never going to go away. So at least wrestling fans are like I'm being kind of dramatic here, but I think there is like some trauma that comes from having to have endured the Roman Reigns, babyface push for eternity, that
Mm-hmm.
people aren't going to forget about that anytime soon when WWE tries to push him again as the face of the company. I think the landscape of the company has changed over the years. Um, but I do think that's something that I am curious about to see what would happen, because I do think that people aren't just going to forget that Roman Reigns is still the guy that Vince McMahon wants us to cheer for.
Well, I guess I'm also curious about when crowds come back, you know, like
Yeah,
legitimate crowds. Like, you know, everyone's been wanting Roman Reigns to turn heel. Like, are they gonna cheer him now that he's a heel? You know, ironically,
I think he
like,
kind of
I'm very curious.
again to the fans like people who take action and people who do things that excite them. So I
Hmm.
think Reigns would actually be cheered now.
But then after that, like, is Vince gonna panic when he hears that? Like,
He's a
what's
babyface
Vince?
now. We got to turn him now. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
we did it.
Like, that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, to not have patience. Realistically, he should just remain the exact same character, remain a heel forever, and that'll probably actually make him a bigger baby face if he plays a heel role on television.
Hmm.
Um, but that. I mean, that's a key aspect of it. One thing that was interesting about the Reigns push, um, which was that I think people tend to, when they think about the Roman Reigns push, they think of, you know, was it Royal Rumble 2015, the one he won, where The Rock came out and the fans booed him in Philadelphia? I think it's
Yeah, 14 or 15.
14, yeah. Um, was it? Which one was it? Because the Batista Royal Rumble win was first, and then the Reigns one was second. And it was either 13-14 or 14-15. I think it might be 13-14.
Yeah,
But
around there.
um, anyway, I think people think of the Reigns push and they remember him being like booed out of the building, and like fans hated him. Like, and he would get the biggest reaction, but his music would hit and you'd hear the loud boos,
Hmm.
and that he was just like this guy who the fans absolutely hated. And that was true for a while, but at some point during the push, um, I'd go back to I think WrestleMania 32, which is 2016, his match against Triple H when he finally won the title at WrestleMania, and beat Triple H. Like, if you go back and watch that match, or if you remember the match, like the crowd is so bored and tired, and they're chanting for the beach ball that's floating around. They're chanting for CM Punk. They're chanting for NXT. They're chanting for literally anything but the match. That should at some point the Roman Reigns push shifted from mostly boos to like mostly indifference, in that like it became less that people hated Roman Reigns and more that people were bored by the Roman Reigns push. Did you sense any of
Yeah,
that at all?
yeah. I guess yeah. There's always other chants going on in matches with Roman Reigns. It was never like they're booing him. They're just wanting to do something else. They're chanting NXT. They are doing the yes chants or the no
Yeah.
chants or whatever because Dan Bryan was big back then. But at least the yes movement was big back then. And yeah, like people just didn't want to see it, but they were given it. And so like instead of just leaving, they just you know I don't want to say they hijacked the match. I don't like using that term, but like the crowd became a character in his matches because
Yeah.
they were
That's good.
obviously not
That's a good way.
subtle. And so yeah, like going back to that Triple H match, it was just interesting because Triple H during that time, he was still capable of putting on good matches, good stories, but just with that match in particular, it's just like an outlier. Like it just, I've heard, people talk about how like, oh, Triple H was sort of wanting Roman to step up to his level in some type of way. You're just like, oh, you want to be the top star, you have to earn it type thing. And it was just a weird type of match because obviously future Triple H matches like with Seth Rollins or even yeah, with Seth Rollins, obviously a lot more happened in that match, but it's still, it was a weird match to say the least.
And I'm using that as an example of just like I just think there was a shift away from Roman being this hated character, and people who were backing Roman at the time and backing WWE's decision would say, well, he gets the biggest reaction, doesn't matter if it's cheering or booing, which is just a bunch of BS. Like
And that's what
that's
Triple
one of the
H
most
said.
annoying things. Like, it doesn't matter, he's getting a big reaction. It's like, dude, if like someone came out and started like if you had a heel that came out and did like Nazi gestures or something like that, that would get a big reaction. But
for the wrong reasons.
It wouldn't be good. Like I hate that mentality. And obviously the people booed Cena, and Cena kept business strong, or as strong as it could probably possibly be during that time period. So I think it kind of taught people to think that it doesn't matter if the crowd's booing him, because
But the difference there is that like it became cool to chant to boo Cena, like to yell like John Cena sucks during
yeah,
John Cena's
yeah, yeah,
entrance. It
yeah,
became
yeah.
cool to say that, but for Roman Reigns, it was never cool to boo him. Like people were like they're just doing it. Like there's no reason to do it. They weren't doing it ironically as they did with Cena.
Yeah, and like the other thing is like I don't want to get too far into like a numbers discussion or a business discussion.
Sure.
If you look at Roman Reigns, the Roman Reigns era, I'll use 2014 as the day he was really pushed as the top guy to today. The metrics for interest and popularity in WWE have declined greatly. And that goes, less people. Yeah, obviously less viewership, which is a much bigger conversation as far as like just general cable trends and that kind of thing. But less house attendance down, merchandise sales down. It's WWE's profits have gone up due to the TV industry being so lucrative that they're able to basically get all the money from TV, and it doesn't matter if they're not making as much money on stuff like live event attendance or merchandise sales or stuff like that. But you can look at the Roman Reigns era and say that this guy has been a complete and total business failure for WWE. Business, if you want to look at it like the way we go back in history and look at and judge people's business value and say like, well, when that person was on top, they never drew, so they're bad. That was the Roman Reigns era would kind of tell you that the company has been going downward in popularity since they started pushing him. I don't think that is really Roman Reigns' fault. It's not his fault at all. Is some of the disinterest in WWE coming from the consistent push of Roman Reigns? I think indirectly that's probably true. I think if you were to ask people why they stopped watching WWE over that time period, I don't think a lot of them would be like, because I hate Roman Reigns. I think a lot of them would be like, they just didn't produce. There weren't big stars that I cared about seeing. There weren't big matches that I cared about seeing.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between those two things. But I do think that, like, Reigns was asked to be the face of the company, to drive business, to keep business steady or drive it upwards. And I don't see WWE having made big strides in popularity during that time period that he's been put in that position. I think that the company has, and there's a lot of other issues for that. It's not just Roman Reigns. It's not just his decision to face the company. Just like it wasn't Bret Hart's fault that the company didn't draw as big when he was the main event guy as Hulk Hogan, as Hulk Hogan did. But I do think that there's like, with all of that being said, that Roman might be a failure from like, if you just look at hard business perspective, and that he never turned into that big star that WWE wanted him to do. When they turned him heel, it just means more with Roman because he has been pushed as that big star, and there's no one else in that company, with the exception of maybe a guy like Randy Orton because he belongs to a different era. There's no other full-time performer in that company that has the star power of Roman Reigns, even if you want to argue that Roman Reigns is not really like as big of a star as he should be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but the idea I'm kind of saying is that because Roman, even though fans have resented him for it, even though the drawing numbers aren't really there, because he's main event in so many shows, because the company has revolved around him, because the entire star elevation system has been about getting him over. Anything that happens with him, anything that he does, comes across as meaning more to the fans and to being more interesting because he is that guy. He is the face of the company and has become the biggest star in professional wrestling, by virtue of getting that giant push from WWE. And I think that people, like, if you were to say Roman Reigns is the biggest star in professional wrestling, I think some people would be like, oh my God, no, he's not. But realistically, nobody's even close.
Yeah, I mean, even those people who say he's not, like, what's your counter? Like,
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's like Daniel Bryan to an extent, but still, like, I think
yeah,
his injuries and just his time away from wrestling has kind of halted that momentum. Like AJ Styles, not
yeah,
really. I mean, for the wrestling fan,
yeah.
maybe,
And
but like
like
not for the general public.
it's yeah, like and it's not Okada, it's not Kenny Omega. Um, you know, like
I mean, no offense to him. I mean, Cody Rhodes. You know, he was super over in AEW, but I don't think the general public
yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying
know
those
who
guys
Cody
aren't big
Rhodes
stars,
is.
but
Oh yeah, of
like
course.
when it
Yeah,
comes to
they are
the
big
biggest
big
star, like,
stars.
but if you're, and again, this goes back to like if you're gonna be that guy, if you're gonna be the face of WWE, like you got to be so great,
Hmm.
and like I said, like Cena, like again, I'm on the record, got plenty of columns talking about the problems with John Cena and stuff like that. But over the years, I think, especially as he stepped away and Reigns has stepped into that role, I mean, I think that there is much greater appreciation for what John Cena brought to the table. Um, that was probably underappreciated by a lot of fans when he was at his peak. That this guy was on top for more than 10 years, and even if sometimes his matches were bad and sometimes his feuds were redundant, he often made everything feel like it was such a big deal. And Reigns can do that sometimes, but there was a lot of times where it's like I could not care less that Roman Reigns is wrestling Braun Strowman on this pay-per-view. I mean, even look at Reigns' title reigns, with the exception of this one that he's on right now. Like, what are any memorable moments from his title runs previously?
I mean, just other than I guess maybe the fact that he won the title. That's
Yeah, but like,
really
like,
it.
like, like, and that's again, that's not his fault. A
Yeah,
lot of
no,
yeah,
it's always goes back to like the booking of WWE.
yeah, and the presentation of the stars, but I do think that like you have to be at a certain level to be pushed in that role, and you know what? He might be there now. I can't you can't tell me
Yeah,
that
it's
it's not
possible.
right now. You can't tell me that what he's doing is not very interesting.
Hmm.
It's the whole. It's basically the only reason that I would want to watch WWE television right now is to find out what Roman Reigns is doing. Like, like it's the best angle that the company has going. Bailey and Sasha too. I don't want to slight that, but and perhaps this is the last thing we'll touch on is the Paul Heyman aspect on this, and seeing what Paul Heyman has been able to do with Roman Reigns. I can't help but think like, man, I wish this guy was still right, booking Raw. He wasn't perfect in that role, but
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, that's the thing. I think the lows were really low, and I
yeah,
think that's what most people remember.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree, and like, but one of the things in wrestling is that you can screw up the undercard and the midcard pretty badly, but as long as
Mhm.
you get the big stuff right, the main events right, that's you're usually on pretty good ground. I mean, you can look at to use New Japan as an example. New Japan's mid card and undercard is often not given that much thought and is often in general kind of disarray. The tag team, the heavyweight tag teams, the junior heavyweight tag team divisions, those are just like kind of randomly put together on every show. Um, like all the various, the never openweight championship, the United States championship. Um, they got so many titles now, it's ridiculous. But the 6-man titles, like they have so many titles, like that stuff, like is even during their total peak over the last 10 years. A lot of times that stuff is very forgettable and nobody cares about it and it's very boring.
Mhm.
But because they get Tanahashi Okada Omega, Naito and Omega, Naito and Ibushi, Naito and Okada, like they get in Tanahashi. they get the big stuff right. They nail that stuff. And that's what people will remember about, that era of New Japan. They're not going to remember like, oh yeah, like Gato, he did a terrible job with the tag teams. Like, people don't worry about that. So, it does. To me, like, I didn't think Heyman was perfect running Raw. I would love for like someone that isn't like from another era to have more creative control in WWE.
Bruce Pritchard.
Well, like, I mean, I wrote about this when WWE made a huge deal. Eric Bischoff's going to run SmackDown and Paul Heyman's going to run Raw, and people were like, "Oh my god, I'm so excited!" Like, and I wrote about it at the time, and I said, like, you can't just go back in time and get the guys who were successful from 20 or 30 years ago. Like, you have to have a new. Wrestling is only going to get big if people take it in a new direction, and I don't know if you're getting that new direction with these older guys from previous generations in charge. Now, Heyman, to his credit, has been around the company for a while, and I think he pays attention, and he knows who the guys are now. So I think so. I don't think he's like totally incompetent for the position, but you can't just go back in time, and you can't just hope that the guys who were booking 25 years ago would be good today, because the business is so different. That's Vince. Vince is a guy who was a successful booker a long time ago. And I talked about it again, like Roman Reigns is the outdated model. That push was had an outdated philosophy about how to make a babyface. That's just where it is. But I don't know, you got anything else you want to ask? Any questions you got about Roman Reigns?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of a wait and see right now where the storyline's going with him and the Usos. Obviously, the dream WrestleMania match. I think it's been reported that WWE wants it as well. The Rock. It seems like a pipe dream, but still, it would be really cool for that to happen. I'll just say that. Obviously, we don't really talk about much about the big WrestleMania match, but still, like, yeah, it's a pipe dream to get the Rock in there, especially with how busy he is. But still, it's the dream match for this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's actually good. That's actually a good point. Is like Roman Reigns is like, we talked about his future opponents. It looks like he's going to feud with Daniel Bryan, which should be good. But if he's going to feud with him now, it's probably not a feud for WrestleMania. Who's going to be that guy for WrestleMania? It's got to be a big opponent. If it's a Roman Reigns match, it's not going to be like he's going to wrestle, the Sheamus, or the Miz or someone like that. It's got to be a big name. Reigns versus Daniel Bryan, if you want to hold off on that, I think that's a great storyline. Bryan wins the Rumble this year, then it's him versus Reigns at WrestleMania.
That could be interesting.
I think that would be perhaps a better use of Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan than just doing it kind of in like this November, December, January kind of window. That's kind of historically not a good business, like not a hot month for wrestling, the end of the year. The Rock match is really interesting. If The Rock were to come back and do another wrestling match, I think a long match, a real feud, a real match, I think that he'd probably want to do it against Roman Reigns. And, Rock doing the job to Roman Reigns would, who doesn't do the job to Roman Reigns, but it would definitely help Roman Reigns' career. It's, Rock's at a different level than John Cena or The Undertaker when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's going to be really difficult for them to do that. The Rock's he's going to really have to want to do that, because the last time The Rock had a very serious wrestling match, his second match against Cena, he got injured, and he was supposed to film, I think, the Hercules movie, right after WrestleMania, and that got delayed because he had a rehab, because he had a muscle tear. That got delayed by like several months, which is like is a pretty big deal. Like, a lot of these people work on these movie productions, and if The Rock is like, I hurt myself wrestling, you guys all like have to delay, like everything gets pushed back 3 months. It's like a really big deal. Like, you really can't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it costs millions of dollars.
Yeah, and The Rock's in like 7 movies a year. Like, he's on a very tight, organized schedule, I'm sure. In addition to the 10 million other things, he's running the XFL. He's gonna run for president. He's like you said, he's got a million things going on. And The Rock is at like a pretty big injury risk if he's going to wrestle a serious match. It's not going to say he's going to get hurt, but I'm not an athletic trainer, but just having watched a lot of wrestling, the guys who are older, who have a ton of muscle mass and don't wrestle frequently are at pretty high risk of getting injured at a much greater degree than like if it was like Johnny Gargano was wrestling or something like that. Like I mean, Triple H is a good example of a guy who again, older, a lot of muscle mass, doesn't wrestle like all the time, and a lot, he gets in the ring, he gets hurt. I mean, that's just what happens. That kind of thing. Undertaker, similar thing, like gets hurt. He's just physically, it's really difficult to do that. So, and it's different if The Rock gets hurt than it is if The Undertaker gets hurt, because The Rock's got a lot of things that he has to do, So to me, like, he'd have to really clear out his schedule, like, and not have any movies scheduled for a few months after, his wrestling match, to make sure that if he is injured, that he's okay. But obviously, that would be the biggest match for him. I think that's you're right to it's a good thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, I mean and they kind of teased the idea that like the whole thing is that like Roman Reigns is the head of the table, he's the tribal chief, he's part of the family. Everyone knows Roman Reigns is related to The Rock, and it's like people kind of are scoffing like, oh well, Roman Reigns can't be the head of the table when The Rock is in the family, because The Rock's one of the biggest celebrities in the entire world. And so, like, obviously, if The Rock comes out, he's going to, has that promo ready to go, right? You can already see it happening when it comes to if he were to confront Roman Reigns about it. And that'd be an interesting feud. I mean, asking a lot out of Roman, the promo guy, to get in there with The Rock, because The Rock's going to come out there, especially if there are fans there. The Rock's going to be so over. The Rock's going to have so much charisma. The crowd's going to love all his catchphrases. You have to be like, like, again, not to talk about John Cena's talent again, but like you have to be a Cena level guy on the mic to hang in there with The Rock without looking like a lesser star.
I mean, we saw that when Roman was face to face with John Cena. Like, he forgot his lines, and John Cena called him out on it, and it embarrassed him. Like, it really hurt Roman Reigns.
That feud even though he went over, Roman, and it was designed to really help him. It didn't help him, and that's one of those things.
That promo was a big part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with these promos, guys, and that's how WWE likes to build their storylines. They don't have to do that. They don't have to have Roman and Rock go face to face on the mic, but that's what WWE's going to do, because that's their storytelling device. But it's going to be tough for Roman, and if he's the heel, that's okay. If he was supposed to be the babyface and The Rock is supposed to be the heel, that would be a big problem, because it would never work.
God.
And I don't even think WWE's crazy enough to try that. But they had Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker. Oh, The Undertaker has been a heel. Like, isn't it weird that The Undertaker was a heel in the match against Shane McMahon in the Hell in a Cell match?
He is denying Shane's right to run Monday Night Raw.
That wasn't that long ago, and like it's kind of crazy that WWE brought back The Undertaker that would have been 2016, I think, would have been that WrestleMania, because I remember where I was when I found out that Shane McMahon came back. I was covering a high school basketball game when I was in college, and I remember I got into my car, and it was also 8 degrees outside, and I just took out my phone and I looked on social media. Everyone was just like, Shane McMahon. I'm like, what? Because no one anticipated Shane McMahon coming out. No. That was that's legitimately one of the biggest surprises. I kind of wish he never came out, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh, well.
but that was a legitimately big surprise, and that was the biggest match at WrestleMania. But it was one of those things that, even though it's only a few years ago, has aged really badly. Like, the Shane had a lockbox that he was going to reveal, that some incriminating evidence against Vince, and oh boy, that's a bad one. That'll be a fun one to do, a deep dive, a retroactive look at that feud, because that is It's not that long ago, and that thing is bizarre. Like Undertaker heel, Shane, Vince, like then I think Shane and Vince were like best pals, like a few like very soon after. Just really weird segment. But
Yeah,
that's
just a lot of weird dynamics.
all right. You got anything you want to plug?
Just obviously from subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter, follow me on Twitter if you want as well. Not sure if I'm gonna live tweet Full Gear this Saturday, but we'll see from there. But obviously, yeah, leave us comments. What do you think about Roman Reigns? For initially compared to now, just give us your thoughts on Roman Reigns, whether they're good or bad, because like you said, he's a very polarizing guy.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. Just everyone, thanks for the support. Thanks for keep listening. Again, feel free to reach out, read comments, follow us on Twitter, all that stuff, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.